Yeah, so I have to restart this. I want to go to the origins of where the breakdown began and how we got to this point because I was here and I studied it and I watched it and I witnessed it. And I would say that the beginning of the destruction of urban communities where predominantly black people reside and live began in the 70s. If you watch the late 60s, early 70s, if you watch the movie The Wizard of Oz, I use these things as teaching tools and reference. In this movie, the Wicked Witch was talking about destroying the people in the village and how to get rid of them and subdue them. And she said poppies will give them poppies. Poppies is the plants that's used to poppies are the plants that's used to excuse me, I'm working while I'm talking to y'all. That's used to produce heroin and other drugs, but mainly heroin. Um, they have us believing that biblical times no longer exist, but that's not true. We're still dealing with the same enemy we were dealing with in biblical times. And these people know that we are the natural custodians on this planet and they don't like it. And they want us gone, just like they wanted Jesus gone. It's the same thing. It's just that they have us believing that Jesus is one person when it's a soul group. It's a group of us. It's a group of people who have consciousness, who have a certain mindset and can change things in the world. So in biblical times, when King Herod wanted to know when the arrival of Jesus was precisely, he had his astrologists do the horoscopes and look or use telescopes or whatever they do, astrology, to look into the stars and see when Jesus would be born. And that's the same thing they do. They look into the stars and they see what soul group is arriving from the cosmos because we are cosmic. Why we are cosmic? How do I know we're cosmic? Because the only other place besides us that melanin is produced in the world is in the cosmos. We are the only beings that produce melanin that's equivalent to the potency of the stars of the cosmos. So when they saw the soul group that was the beginning waves of our powerful ancestors returning here, reincarnating to this planet, um, they came up with the drug heroin and saturated the urban communities with heroin. But heroin was a drug that you only had to buy once a day. You buy one bag a day, it lasts you for the day, and you wouldn't get physically sick because people get physically sick when they begin to use heroin and don't have it. So when that didn't work fast enough, even though it worked, but it just didn't move fast enough. You had the second wave of us come, which was my generation, even to the point where we were rocking King Tut chains, Nefertiti, African chains. Like we loved gold. You could tell that we were the ancestors from Kemet, which is Egypt now, because we liked gold so much. And Kemet, during those times, 2,000 years before Jesus, we used gold to make furniture and caskets and shit. But we loved gold. And we came back with that same energy. We loved gold. We wore the big dookie gold chains, the big four-finger rings. We were obsessed with gold. And even one of the most notorious gangsters that I grew up with in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, his name was King Tut. So you can't make these things up, people. You cannot make these things up. King Tut is also the one that allegedly, I'm not sure if it was true, had something to do with Tupac being shot at Quad Studios. Oh, it was actually the shooter. From what I gathered from that story, Tupac was trying to pull his gun out of his waist and he shot himself in the groin. And when that shot let off, they started shooting because I never known Tut to really be that much of a killer, but he would rob you. That was his main thing. He was a stick up kid. But anyway, back to the subject. When you go back to the 80s now, they come into us, they present to us this movie, Scarface. If you are familiar with any story of any big drug dealer from the 80s, they will tell you that Scarface was the movie that introduced us to the drug game. Um, Everybody wanted to be Tony Montana. All the dudes, all the females wanted to be Elvita. So cocaine was introduced to us, and it became uh, what the high class people would do: go to the clubs, go to the after hour clubs. All the high scale people would be in there with their cocaine. It was a social drug, and you wouldn't lose your job and your life, sniffing cocaine. But when it turned into freebasing, because freebasing was something that you do. You cook the cocaine and you make it into another form, adding cold water, baking soda, and it had more potency. But the high was only 3 minutes. So people were constantly looking for money to buy crack because the high only lasted for 3 minutes. And as described to me, when I asked people who I used to look up to that fell off, left their families, just abandoned all their responsibilities, their children, everything, why they chose to do that, they said they was chasing the first high. Because, we tend to experiment with drugs when they come out, when they hit the streets, and that one just happened to trap people. Most people that used it the first time never stopped using it. So when crack was introduced and people started abandoning their responsibilities and morals went out the window. All the bad girls, all the top females in the neighborhood were sucking, having fellatio in the staircase with people for drugs and sex in the staircases, and there was no boundaries. And prior to crack, there was an abundance of boundaries, whereas we all raised each other. We all looked out for each other. But when crack came, it disseminated that aspect of us, and we never recovered. We never recovered from the effects of the crack era, and it just deteriorated until it became what it is now. And not only that, in the early 90s or maybe the late 90s, they decided to tell us that we can no longer discipline our children the way that we were used to disciplining our children. Like beating, so getting a beating, getting your behind beat when you did something wrong. And my first thought, people, when I heard them say that we can no longer discipline our children, that our children can call CPS, Child Protective Services, on us, I said to myself, they now want our children to become savages so they can shoot them down in the street. And look at now, 20 years later, what is happening? Our children are getting shot down in the street. All morality has gone out the window. You have people filming dead bodies on lives. You have people getting raped on live. You got people getting murdered on live. This is total chaos and destruction. And this is not the direction that us as a people are supposed to be in. We are in reverse. We are operating in reverse. Because we are the natural leaders and the natural custodians. And they have now the patients are treating the doctors, and the doctors are being treated by the patients. Everything is in reverse. We also think that we as individuals are not responsible for the climate and the way that the world goes, what direction it goes in, and we are. By little things that we do in our own daily lives, we affect the vibration and the frequency on this planet because you are part of that through your melanin. That's why we have the most influence. That's why we have such good dancing skills and rhythm, because we're connected to the planet via our melanin. And it gives us, we vibrate differently than other races because we have an abundance of melanin. That's what gives us our complexion. So you have to tie the past in with the future and really to understand who the culprit is behind all of the monstrosities we are suffering now in this day and time. It didn't just start out of nowhere. It was seeds were planted, laws were made, things were rearranged because we are always constantly the ones that they're afraid is going to wake up and stand up and do what we came here to really do. We've been sidetracked and bamboozled. Now, they talk to each other in code about us, about where we are, okay, as a people, spiritually. And one of the things that they use is climate control, climate change. The climate is changing because more of us are becoming conscious and the ice is melting. The ice is melting, the illusion is being removed, and it is metaphorically represented by the universe because of our connection to the universe by the ice melting in the glaciers. You see those movies when they say the gods are returning and the ice melted like they're frozen somewhere and then they unfreeze and the gods are back? Well, that's what's happening, people. They don't make these movies and just make this stuff up. They're not that creative. They're using our history, our mythology, and the knowledge of us and who we are to make these movies and do these things and present these things to us as fiction. And it's not fiction, it's our story. But I'll continue as things come along, guys. If something else comes up, I will break it down to you. But today is going to be a day of the breakdowns because I'm feeling a certain type of way. Peace and love.